They called her Shaky Hand Sarah behind her back, a cruel little nickname that clung to her like the cloying scent of antiseptic in the hallways of St. Luke's Memorial Hospital. Dr. Preston Sterling, the chiseled, Harvard-educated chief resident, with a jawline stolen from a movie poster and an ego that took up more space than the hospital's MRI machine, had actually placed a $500 bet that Sarah Miller wouldn't last a month. He made sure everyone knew about it, winking at the younger nurses who fluttered around him like moths to a flame. Sarah, at 52, with her graying blonde hair pulled back in a severe, unfashionable bun, and a small, tired frame hidden in oversized scrubs, seemed like an easy target. She moved with a deliberate, plotting pace that drove the residents insane, her hands exhibiting a faint, rhythmic tremor they mistook for age, or worse, incompetence. She was just an old nurse, a relic from a bygone era of medicine, who didn't know her place in the gleaming, fast-paced world Sterling was building in his own image. 2 hours from now, Sarah Miller would be standing on a rainy Boston street corner, clutching a soggy cardboard box containing the remnants of her 20-year nursing career, fired for gross insubordination and assaulting a physician. She would feel the cold rain plastering her hair to her forehead and think, with a heavy, suffocating finality, that her life was over. She was wrong. Because what Dr. Sterling and the entire staff of St. Luke's Memorial didn't know was that Sarah Miller's hands didn't shake from age. They shook from the lingering nerve damage she sustained while holding manual pressure on a severed femoral artery of a young ranger for 6 straight hours in the back of a bucking Black Hawk helicopter over the mountains of Afghanistan. They didn't know that her slow, deliberate movements weren't a sign of dementia, but the careful, practiced gait of a woman with a shattered knee, a memento from a mortar blast in Kandahar that she had walked on for 3 miles to reach a wounded soldier. They didn't know that the quiet, raspy-voiced nurse they called Grandma was once known by another name in the shadowy world of Joint Special Operations Command. They called her Dusty, and she was a legend. The security camera footage from that chaotic Tuesday night would later capture the exact moment the carefully constructed world of Dr. Preston Sterling shattered. 1 second, he was the king of his sterile kingdom, basking in the glow of the Trauma Bay lights. The next, he was just a terrified boy in a white coat, face to face with a ghost. A ghost who had just been reawakened. "Look at his neck, you idiot," she would rasp, her voice no longer quiet, but a blade of cold, hard steel that cut through the panic. "He can't breathe." This is the story of that night. The night the arrogant prince met the hidden warrior, and justice arrived not in a police car, but in the deafening thwop, thwop, thwop of helicopter rotors tearing the stormy sky apart. It is a story about how true authority is not given by a title, but earned in the crucible of fire, and how sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should fear the most. The day had started like any other Tuesday in the relentless churn of the St. Luke's emergency department. The air was thick with the familiar cocktail of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the low-grade hum of anxiety. Sarah Miller was in the middle of her chart checks, her movements methodical. She double-checked every entry, her pen hovering over the paper as she confirmed dosages. It was this obsessive precision that Sterling loved to mock. He strode into the nurse's station, his pristine white coat immaculate, his expensive Italian leather shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum. He didn't walk, he made an entrance. "Sarah," he began, his voice loud enough for the gaggle of residents and junior nurses to hear. He leaned against the counter, a smirk playing on his perfect lips. "Did you restock the pediatric crash cart like I asked?" "I did, Dr. Sterling," Sarah replied without looking up from her chart. "Checked all the expiration dates twice." "Twice?" Sterling chuckled, a condescending theatrical sound. "That's good. With hands as shaky as yours, it's probably best to be sure. We can't have our tiny patients getting expired epinephrine because Grandma forgot her reading glasses. A few of the younger nurses giggled. Brittany Moore, a pretty brunette who dreamed of catching Sterling's eye, was among them. She avoided Sarah's gaze, her face flushing with a mixture of amusement and shame. Sarah said nothing. She simply closed the chart, placed it back in its slot with a quiet click, and moved on to the next one. Her silence was a wall Sterling loved to batter himself against. It infuriated him that she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. He wasn't done. He smoothed the lapels of his coat, a preening gesture he performed a dozen times a shift. And the IV bags in Trauma Bay 3, did you get those? Yes, doctor. And you wiped down the counters? Yes, doctor. And you emptied the linen hampers? That's not my job, doctor, Sarah said, her voice still level, but with an edge of weariness. That's environmental services. Sterling's smile tightened. Oh, I know, but I thought a little light physical activity might be good for you. Keep the blood flowing. Protocol is just a guideline when a superior gives a direct order for the efficiency of the unit, isn't it? He was quoting the hospital manual, twisting its meaning into a cudgel. Brenda O'Brien, the charge nurse, looked up from her computer, her face a mask of weary disapproval. Brenda was a veteran of the ED wars, with arms like a dock worker and a stare that could curdle milk. She had zero patience for Sterling's games, but he was the son of Senator Huntington, a man whose family had donated the entire west wing of the hospital. So, Brenda, like everyone else, mostly kept her mouth shut. She's got patience, Preston, Brenda grunted. Let her do her actual job. Sterling waved a dismissive hand at Brenda. Patient care is a team sport, Brenda, and Sarah is a team player. Aren't you, Sarah? He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still perfectly audible. I'm just trying to protect the hospital. HR keeps sending us these charity cases. We have to be cautious. The insult, sharp and cruel, hung in the air. Charity case. An old nurse, probably desperate for the pension, hired out of pity. Sarah finally looked up, her pale blue eyes meeting his. There was no anger in them, just a profound, bottomless exhaustion. For a fleeting second, Sterling felt a flicker of something uncomfortable, like looking into a deep, still body of water and not being able to see the bottom. He quickly squashed it. I will recheck the crash cart, doctor, she said, her voice a low rasp. She turned and walked away, her pace steady and measured, each step a quiet act of defiance. The slight limp from her bad knee was more pronounced today. Sterling watched her go, a triumphant smirk returning to his face. He turned to the junior resident, David Cole. See? You just have to know how to manage them. Firm but fair. David Cole nodded, but his eyes followed Sarah. He'd seen her tremor before, but he'd also seen her thread a 24-gauge IV into the spiderweb vein of a dehydrated 90-year-old with a single perfect attempt after 2 other nurses had failed. He'd seen her calm a violent psychiatric patient, not with restraints, but with a low, steady voice and unblinking eye contact. There was something about her that didn't add up. Later that afternoon, the humiliation continued. Sterling assigned Sarah to what was essentially janitorial duty, ordering her to clean and organize the supply closets, a task usually reserved for student volunteers. He made her do it 3 times, each time finding a new, imagined fault. The saline bags aren't aligned, Sarah. They need to be perfectly flush. Presentation matters. It shows we care about details. These suture kits are a millimeter out of place. Do it again. Sarah simply complied, her face impassive. She moved boxes, wiped shelves, and arranged supplies with the same methodical focus she applied to everything. Inside, a cold, hard knot of something she hadn't felt in years was beginning to form in her stomach. It wasn't anger. It was a feeling much older, much more dangerous. It was the feeling of a boundary being crossed, a line being drawn in the sand. She remembered her late husband, a career army man himself, telling her before he passed, "Find your peace, Sarah. You've earned it. No more fights." She was trying. Lord, she was trying. But peace was a fragile thing. Big Mike, the evening security guard, a gentle giant of a man in his 60s, found her in the supply closet, carefully stacking boxes of gauze. He had a cup of coffee in his hand. "He's a real piece of work, that one," Mike said quietly, nodding his head towards the main floor. Sarah just shrugged, not wanting to complain. "Don't let him get to you," Mike continued, setting the coffee down on a shelf for her. "I've been here 30 years. I've seen doctors like him come and go. They're like comets, bright, flashy, and they burn out fast. Folks like you, you're the stars. You're always there." Sarah gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Mike." "Just watch that blood pressure," he said with a wink. "Don't let the little tyrant give you a stroke." The conversation was a small kindness in a day full of petty cruelties. It was a reminder that not everyone saw her as a useless old woman. If you're already hooked by this story of justice, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It really helps us share more stories of everyday heroes who refuse to back down. Now, back to Sarah's story, because what happened next changed everything. The shift wore on. The steady rhythm of the ED continued. A broken arm, a suspected heart attack, a child with a fever. Sarah went about her duties, her professionalism a shield against Sterling's constant sniping. He seemed to be everywhere she was, a constant, condescending presence. At 9:47 p.m., the relative calm of the evening was shattered. The alarm didn't just ring, it screamed. A piercing, high-pitched klaxon that cut through the hospital's low hum like a physical blow. "Code Black! Code Black! Trauma Bay 1! ETA 2 minutes! Military escort!" Brenda O'Brien's voice boomed over the intercom, stripped of its usual gruffness, now sharp with urgency. "This is not a drill! I repeat, this is not a drill!" The atmosphere in the ED shifted instantly. The casual chatter died. Nurses and doctors moved with a new, focused intensity. Code Black was the hospital's designation for a mass casualty event, or a high-priority government-related trauma. It meant chaos was coming. Sterling puffed out his chest, his moment to shine. "All right, people, listen up," he yelled, taking charge. "I want Trauma 1 prepped and ready. Cole, get me a full trauma panel on standby. Brittany, get the rapid infuser. I want 2 large-bore IVs ready to go. Move, move, move!" He was a general playing war, barking orders, his face flushed with excitement. This was his stage. Sarah, who had been restocking a medication cart, froze for a half-second. Military escort. The words sent a jolt through her, a phantom echo of a life she had tried so hard to leave behind. She could almost smell the diesel fumes and the hot metallic tang of blood in the air. She took a deep breath, pushing the memories down, and moved towards Trauma Bay 1. Her job was to assist, to follow orders, to be a nurse. Less than 2 minutes later, the double doors to the ambulance bay burst open with a violent crash. They didn't swing open. They were thrown open. 2 uniformed military police officers, weapons held at a low ready, flanked a gurney that was being pushed at a dead run by a team of frantic paramedics. The man on the gurney was a mess of blood and tactical gear. "Male, late 30s, one of the paramedics screamed, his voice strained. "Multiple GSWs to the chest and abdomen. Massive hemorrhage. BP is 60 over palp, pulse thready at 140. We've pushed 4 units of O-negative in the field." Another MP, a sergeant, followed close behind, his face grim. "He's Navy, Special Operations. Commander William Cal Jensen. Extraction went south. Sterling stepped forward, a look of grim importance on his face. All right, get him in here. On my count. 1, 2, 3. They transferred the commander to the trauma bed. The room was a blur of motion and noise. Monitors began to beep frantically. Brenda was shouting for blood from the blood bank. David Cole was trying to get a central line in. Sarah stood at the edge of the room, her eyes scanning the patient with an intensity that was far from her usual quiet demeanor. She wasn't looking at him as a nurse. She was triaging him with the cold, practiced eye of a combat medic. She saw the obvious, the blood-soaked fatigues, the multiple entry wounds. But she saw more. She saw the subtle, almost imperceptible signs that Sterling, in his flurry of activity, was missing. The commander's neck veins were distended, bulging against the skin of his thick neck. His trachea, the windpipe, wasn't centered. It was deviated, pushed slightly to the left. And as a nurse cut away his tactical vest, Sarah saw a puffiness under the skin of his chest, a condition called subcutaneous emphysema. It felt like Rice Krispies under the fingertips. Her blood ran cold. He's got a tension pneumothorax, she said, her voice low but clear. He's going to arrest. Sterling, who was barking orders to control the bleeding from a nasty-looking shrapnel wound in the commander's neck, shot her a look of pure fury. Stay out of this, Sarah, he snapped. I'm the attending here. The priority is the exsanguination from this neck wound. It's right near the carotid. Get me more lap pads. He was wrong. The neck wound was visually dramatic, a gusher. But the real killer was silent and invisible. Air was leaking from a punctured lung into the chest cavity with every breath, building up pressure like a balloon. It was crushing his heart and his other lung. The blood pressure wasn't dropping just from blood loss. It was dropping because his heart was being squeezed to a stop. Doctor, his breath sounds are absent on the right side, Sarah insisted, her voice rising slightly. His trachea is deviated. It's a classic sign. I don't have time for a textbook lesson from a geriatric nurse, Sterling bellowed, his face red with rage and the stress of the situation. Are you questioning my medical judgment in front of my team? Get out! Get out of my trauma bay! The patient on the table let out a choked gasp. His eyes, which had been half open and dazed, rolled back in his head. His lips were turning a dusky, terrifying shade of blue. Beep! 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 The heart monitor flatlined into a single, piercing tone. He's in PEA! Brenda yelled. Starting compressions! Sterling froze. For a single, fatal second, the mask of the arrogant prince cracked, and behind it was a scared, incompetent young man, completely out of his depth. He was focused on the bleeding, the flashy injury, and he had missed the simple textbook diagnosis that was killing the man right in front of him. He stared at the flatlining monitor, paralyzed. In that moment of frozen chaos, Sarah Miller made a decision. She had spent 5 years trying to be a civilian, trying to be anonymous, trying to follow the rules. She had tried to honor her promise to her husband. But there was another promise she had made, a much older one, an oath. First, do no harm. And in this case, that meant acting. Her career, her pension, her quiet life, it all evaporated. There was only the dying soldier on the table. She moved. She didn't run like the younger nurses. She moved with a sudden, explosive efficiency that was terrifying to watch. She didn't shove her way through the crowd. She flowed through it, a ghost moving through obstacles. She grabbed a 14-gauge angiocath from an open IV tray, a long, thick needle. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Brenda shouted, pausing compressions for a second. Sterling finally snapped out of his stupor. "Stop her! She's lost her mind! Security!" Sarah ignored them. She was at the patient's side. She didn't hesitate. Her hands, The same hands that trembled when holding a coffee cup were now rock steady. This was a different kind of steadiness. This was the stillness of a predator, of a surgeon under fire. She placed her left hand on the commander's chest, her fingers finding the landmarks with practiced ease. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. It was a motion she had performed 1,000 times in the dark, in the dust, in the back of vibrating helicopters, with bullets cracking overhead. "Don't you touch him!" Sterling shrieked, lunging for her. Sarah didn't even look at him. As he reached for her, she dropped her shoulder and pivoted, not pushing him, but executing a perfect tactical block. Her elbow connected solidly with his chest, sending the much larger man stumbling backward with a surprised grunt. He crashed into a supply cart, scattering instruments across the floor. The room went deathly silent, except for the useless wail of the flatline monitor. Everyone stared, frozen in disbelief. The quiet, shaky old nurse had just physically checked the chief resident. Sarah didn't waste the second she had bought. She held a thick needle like a dart. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't check the chart. She didn't call a timeout. She plunged the needle deep into the commander's chest, through skin and muscle, between the ribs. There was an audible sound that filled the silent room. Hiss. It was the sound of trapped air, under immense pressure, rushing out of the chest cavity. It was the sound of a life being given back. Instantly, the commander's body convulsed. He took a huge, shuddering gasp of air. The dusky blue of his lips began to fade, replaced by a desperate, beautiful pink. On the monitor, the flat line blipped. Then it blipped again. A rhythm appeared. Sinus tachycardia, fast but stable. His blood pressure, which had been non-existent, shot up to 80/50. The hissing stopped. Sarah pulled the needle out, leaving the plastic catheter in place, and taped it down. She stepped back from the table, her face beaded with sweat. She peeled off her bloody gloves and dropped them on the floor. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it was the familiar tremor of an adrenaline dump after the danger had passed. The room was still silent. Everyone was staring at her as if she had just grown a second head. Brittany Moore's hands were pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with awe. David Cole looked like he had just seen a ghost. Brenda O'Brien's jaw was on the floor. Sterling was on his hands and knees, scrambling to pick up the scattered instruments, his face a mask of incandescent rage and utter humiliation. The patient on the table, Commander Jensen, stirred. His eyes fluttered open. They were no longer dazed. They were sharp, intelligent, and focused. They scanned the room, bypassing the doctors, the nurses, the machines. They found Sarah. He was still weak, an oxygen mask now over his face, but he raised one trembling hand. It was a struggle, but he brought it to his brow in a slow, formal, lingering salute. Through the oxygen mask, he whispered a single word, a raspy sound that was nonetheless clear in the stunned silence of the room. Dusty. Then he let his hand fall, his eyes never leaving hers, a look of profound, absolute trust and recognition on his face. The room held its breath. "What?" Sterling stammered, getting to his feet, his pristine white coat now smudged with grime from the floor. "What the hell just happened? What did he call you?" Sarah looked at the commander, and for the first time that night, a flicker of her old self returned. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "At ease, soldier," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Let us work." Then she turned her gaze to Sterling, and her eyes were chips of ice. "He's stable," she said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "You can manage the bleeding now. Do your job, doctor." Incredible, right? If you want to see more stories where the underdog becomes the hero, subscribe to this channel right now and ring that notification bell. Also, Comment below with your best guess about what happens to Dr. Sterling. Because trust me, his downfall is going to be spectacular. Let's continue. The spell was broken. The trauma team, jolted back to life, scrambled to follow Sarah's lead, now treating the commander with a renewed sense of purpose. David Cole, the young resident, was now looking at Sarah with something akin to worship. Brenda O'Brien started barking orders again, but this time she directed a question to Sarah. "What do you need, Miller?" It wasn't a demand, it was a request. "Chest tube tray," Sarah said simply. "And let's get another unit of packed cells in him. He's still hypotensive from the blood loss." Sterling, however, had recovered from his shock and was now consumed by a tidal wave of fury. His public humiliation was complete. A nurse, an old, incompetent nurse, had not only disobeyed his direct order, but had physically assaulted him and then shown him up in front of his entire team. "You are finished," he shrieked, his voice cracking with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. "You are fired. You assaulted a physician. You performed an unauthorized procedure on a patient. I'm calling security. I'm calling the police. I'll have your license revoked." He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking far more than Sarah's ever had. But before he could dial, the hospital administrator, Harold Pemberton, scurried into the trauma bay. Pemberton was a man who seemed to be perpetually sweating, his main function being to avoid liability at all costs. He had been alerted by the Code Black and had come to manage the situation. "What in God's name is going on in here?" he demanded, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. Sterling disheveled and raging, Sarah standing calmly amidst the controlled chaos, and a decorated military commander on the table.
"This nurse," Sterling spat. "This insubordinate, violent woman just assaulted me and performed a dangerous, unsanctioned procedure on this patient. She needs to be removed, immediately." Pemberton's eyes darted nervously between Sterling, the son of his hospital's biggest benefactor, and the very important-looking patient on the table, who was now stable. His bureaucratic mind whirred, calculating risk. "Sarah, is this true?" Pemberton asked, his tone already accusatory.
"The patient had a tension pneumothorax," Sarah stated calmly. "He was in cardiac arrest. I performed a needle decompression. The patient is now stable." "She's lying!" Sterling shouted. "I had the situation under control. She panicked and interfered, endangering the patient." The MP sergeant, who had been standing quietly in the corner, his expression unreadable, finally spoke up. "Sir," he said, addressing Pemberton but looking at Sterling with contempt. "I saw the whole thing. The doctor was frozen. Your nurse here, she saved the commander's life, no question." Pemberton's face went pale. A military witness. This was bad, very bad. But Sterling's father was on the hospital board. He made a political decision. He sided with power. "Regardless of the outcome," Pemberton said, straightening his tie. "Protocols were violated. An assault occurred. Miss Miller, you will come with me to my office. Dr. Sterling, please continue to provide care. We will sort this out." He was choosing to believe Sterling's version of events, or at least to publicly support it. It was the path of least resistance. Sarah didn't argue. She knew it was over. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. She gave one last look at the commander, who was being prepped for surgery by a now competent team under Brenda's watchful eye. His eyes were still on her. He knew. That was enough. She nodded once to the MP sergeant and then followed Pemberton out of the trauma bay, the doors swinging shut behind her. The meeting in Pemberton's plush, mahogany-paneled office was short and brutal. Sterling was there, having left the now stable patient in the care of another attending. He had cleaned himself up, his hair perfectly coiffed again, but a dark bruise was already forming on his chest where Sarah's elbow had connected. He played the victim perfectly. "She was unstable, Harold," Sterling said, his voice now a smooth, rehearsed baritone of concern. "I've been worried about her for weeks. The shaking hands, the confusion. I think she's a danger to our patients. This was a psychotic break. Pemberton, wiping his sweaty forehead with a handkerchief, listened and nodded. An HR director sat silently by, a pre-written termination letter already on the table. Sarah, we have multiple witnesses who say you ignored a direct order from an attending physician and physically assaulted him, Pemberton said, avoiding her eyes. This is a zero-tolerance workplace. We have no choice. Sarah sat there, in the cold leather chair, and felt a strange sense of peace descend upon her. She had saved a life. The rest was just noise.
"The patient is stable, isn't he?" she asked quietly.
That's not the point, Pemberton snapped. It's the only point, Sarah replied. She stood up. Fine. Her simple acceptance seemed to throw them off. They had expected tears, begging, arguments. She gave them nothing. She had faced down men with guns who wanted to kill her. A spineless administrator and an arrogant child in a white coat were nothing. You'll be escorted off the premises, the HR director said coldly, pushing the termination letter and the cardboard box across the table. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Big Mike was waiting outside the office. His face was a thundercloud of anger and sadness. I'm sorry, Sarah, he mumbled as he walked beside her to her locker. This ain't right. It's okay, Mike, she said, managing a small smile. Watch that blood pressure, remember? She packed her few belongings into the box. A cracked coffee mug that said, World's Okayest Nurse, her worn trauma shears, a dying succulent plant from her windowsill, and a small framed photo of her late husband in his army dress uniform. 20 years of service, reduced to a box that wouldn't even fill the passenger seat of her car. As Big Mike escorted her towards the main entrance, the other nurses averted their eyes. They knew what had happened. They knew she had saved that man's life. But they also knew that speaking up would put their own jobs at risk. Fear was a powerful silencer. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh, letting in a gust of cold, rainy Boston air. Take care of yourself, Sarah, Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. She stepped out into the pouring rain, clutching the soggy box to her chest. Her old sedan was in the shop, an expense she couldn't really afford. She started the long 6-block walk to the bus stop, the cold rain soaking through her scrubs, her bad knee throbbing with each step. She huddled under the flimsy shelter of the bus stop, shivering, watching the cars splash through the puddles. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the shelter. A tired, wet, middle-aged woman, unemployed and alone. It's over, she thought. The thought wasn't angry. It was just a heavy, suffocating fact. Maybe Sterling was right. Maybe she was just an old, stubborn nurse who didn't know her place. He would press charges. There would be a police report. She would lose her certification. She'd end up greeting customers at a grocery store. No one would ever know. And then she heard it. At first, it was just a low thrumming, a vibration she felt in her teeth more than she heard with her ears. It was a sound that cut through the drone of the city traffic and the drumming of the rain. Thwop, thwop, thwop. The puddles on the street began to ripple. The glass of the bus shelter rattled. The ground beneath her feet began to vibrate. She looked up. Through the thick grey clouds and the driving rain, 2 points of intensely bright light were descending. The sound grew from a thrum to a deafening roar that pressed against her chest, drowning out every other sound in the city. 2 Black Hawk helicopters, sleek and black as night, were dropping out of the sky. Pedestrians on the street scattered, screaming, thinking it was a terrorist attack. Cars slammed on their brakes, causing a pileup of screeching metal and shattering glass. One of the helicopters, with impossible precision, landed directly in the middle of the intersection in front of the hospital, its powerful downdraft inverting umbrellas and sending trash cans rolling down the street. The other hovered above, its searchlight cutting a brilliant white cone through the gloom. The side door of the landed helicopter slid open. Before anyone could even process what was happening, black SUVs with tinted windows came screeching around the corner, blocking off the street from both ends. Men in dark suits and earpieces, Secret Service, poured out, creating a perimeter. The hospital's main entrance, the same one Sarah had just been exiled from, was now flooded with flashing red and blue lights. The entire block was on lockdown. Sarah stood frozen at the bus stop, the cardboard box slipping from her numb fingers and landing with a wet thud on the pavement. She knew this kind of arrival. This wasn't just a VIP. This was a declaration. From the side of the hovering helicopter, a rope ladder descended. A figure began to climb down, not with the agility of a soldier, but with the slow, deliberate movements of an older man. He landed on the wet pavement, flanked instantly by two of the Secret Service agents. He was a tall man in his late 60s, wearing a simple windbreaker and jeans, but he carried himself with an unmistakable air of command. He held a simple black cane, but he didn't lean on it. He wielded it. He walked through the pouring rain as if it didn't dare touch him. His eyes scanned the chaotic scene, ignoring the hospital, the police, the gawking crowd. He was looking for someone. His gaze swept past the wrecked cars, past the scattering pedestrians, and landed on the lone figure huddled under the bus stop shelter. His eyes locked with Sarah's. A slow smile spread across his face. He started walking towards her, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the wet asphalt. Clack, clack, clack. One of the Secret Service agents tried to hand him an umbrella. He waved it away without breaking stride. He stopped a few feet in front of her. The rain dripped from his silver hair. 4 small silver stars gleamed on the collar of his windbreaker, almost invisible in the gloom, but Sarah saw them. She knew what they meant. "You're a hard woman to track down, Dusty," said General Thomas Cartwright, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, his voice a low, familiar rumble. Sarah just stared at him, unable to speak. "Tom?" she whispered, the name a ghost on her lips. What are you doing here?" "I was in D.C., watching a live press conference from your esteemed hospital," the general said, his eyes twinkling, though his smile had faded. "Some arrogant young doctor was taking credit for saving the life of one of my best commanders. He mentioned an unstable nurse who interfered and was subsequently fired." He paused, his gaze hardening. "I have a long memory, Dusty, and I know for a fact that Commander Jensen is alive for only one reason, and it's not because of some preening child fresh out of medical school." He gestured to one of his aides, a young major who was holding a slim black folder with the Department of Defense seal on it. "They told me you were fired," the general said, his voice dropping, becoming cold and hard as granite. "That ends now." Inside St. Luke's, chaos of a different kind was erupting. Harold Pemberton and Dr. Preston Sterling were in the hospital lobby, which was now swarming with reporters who had materialized out of nowhere. Sterling, high on his victory, was giving a statement. "And while the situation was critical, my team and I were able to stabilize the patient using advanced trauma protocols," Sterling was saying, his face a mask of humble competence for the cameras. "There was an unfortunate incident with a staff member who seemed to be suffering from a degenerative condition, which caused some confusion, but we were able to manage it and ensure the patient received the highest level of care." He was painting Sarah as a demented, dangerous old woman, and himself as the heroic doctor who saved the day in spite of her. It was a lie so audacious, so complete, that it was almost believable. It was at that moment that General Cartwright walked through the automatic doors, flanked by 2 stone-faced MPs and his aide. The rain dripped from his coat, forming a puddle on the polished floor. The entire lobby fell silent. The reporters turned their cameras from Sterling to the four-star general who had just entered the room. Sterling's smug smile faltered. Pemberton looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "General Cartwright," Pemberton stammered, scurrying forward. "What an honor! To what do we owe this unexpected visit?" The general ignored him completely. His eyes were locked on Sterling. He walked right up to the young doctor, his presence sucking all the air out of the room. "Dr. Preston Sterling?" the general asked, his voice dangerously quiet.
"Yes, sir," Sterling said, trying to regain his composure, puffing out his chest.
"Chief Resident, I was just explaining to the press how we saved your commander." "Were you now?" the general said, a cold, humorless smile touching his lips. "I was watching your little press conference. It's time to correct the record." He turned to his aide. "Major." The major stepped forward and opened the black folder. He didn't look at it. He had the contents memorized. "Dr. Sterling," General Cartwright said, his voice now ringing through the silent lobby. "Do you know who Sarah Miller is?" Sterling scoffed. "She was a nurse, an old, incompetent nurse I was forced to terminate just an hour ago for endangering a patient." "Wrong," the general snapped, the word cracking like a whip. He nodded to the major. The major began to read, his voice flat and official, each word a hammer blow against Sterling's carefully constructed reality. "Retired Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Dusty Miller, United States Army Medical Corps. Enlisted as a combat medic at age 19. Served 3 tours in Iraq, 4 in Afghanistan. Attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment and later Joint Special Operations Command as a senior trauma specialist." A gasp went through the crowd of onlookers. Sterling's face had gone from smug to confused to pale. The major continued, his voice relentless. "Recipient of the Army Commendation Medal, the Bronze Star with Valor device for heroism in Fallujah, a Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, and the Distinguished Service Cross for actions performed during Operation Eagle's Claw in the Kunar province." Sterling was shaking his head, his mouth hanging open. "No, that's not possible. She's just a nurse." "She is legendary in the special operations community as Dusty for her ability to perform complex surgical procedures in the most austere environments imaginable," the general cut in, his voice filled with a fierce pride. "She's credited with saving over 200 lives on the battlefield. One of those lives was my own, 20 years ago, in a dusty hellhole in the Hindu Kush Mountains." He tapped his leg with his cane. "This is a souvenir from that day. I would have bled out in that ditch if it hadn't been for a 20-something-year-old medic with nerves of steel and hands blessed by God himself." He took a step closer to Sterling, his eyes burning with cold fire. "Her hands shake, Doctor, because of nerve damage she sustained holding a man's leg together for 6 hours, while refusing evacuation until every other wounded soldier was airlifted out. She walks with a limp because her knee was shattered by shrapnel when she used her own body to shield a wounded Marine from a mortar blast. She is not a charity case. She is a national hero." The silence in the lobby was absolute. The cameras were rolling, capturing every second of Sterling's public evisceration. "I have reviewed the security footage from your trauma bay tonight, Doctor," the general continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I have seen the telemetry data. Commander Jensen was dying. He had a tension pneumothorax that a first-year combat medic in a muddy ditch would have spotted in 10 seconds. You missed it. You were frozen. You were incompetent." He pointed a finger at Sterling's chest. "And when that woman, that hero, tried to save his life, you tried to stop her. You assaulted her." Sterling crumpled. The arrogant facade, the polished veneer, it all shattered, revealing the terrified, pathetic little boy underneath. "No, it's a mistake. My father, Senator Huntington,
he stammered. Your father, the senator, is currently on the phone with the Secretary of Defense, explaining why his son, a doctor at a hospital his family so generously funds, almost killed one of this nation's most vital military assets, and then lied about it on national television, the general said coldly. I don't think he'll be taking your calls for a while. He turned to the pale, sweating Harold Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton, your hospital has a choice to make, right now. You can either be the institution that fired a national hero, or you can be the institution that rectifies a grave injustice. He let the threat hang in the air. Pemberton, ever the survivor, saw which way the wind was blowing. The ship was sinking, and he was not going down with Dr. Sterling. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a letter. It was Sterling's termination letter, pre-written for just such an emergency. He was always prepared to cut someone loose. Dr. Sterling, Pemberton said, his voice trembling but firm. Effective immediately, your privileges at St. Luke's Memorial are suspended. The board has voted to terminate your contract pending a full federal investigation. He had thrown Sterling under the bus so fast the tires squealed. The general wasn't finished. He turned to the stunned crowd of nurses and doctors. Let me be clear. The culture of fear and intimidation at this hospital ends tonight. The United States government is opening a full inquiry into this institution's practices, its billing, its malpractice cover-ups, and its treatment of its staff. Then he turned and looked towards the entrance. He nodded to the MP sergeant. Bring her in. The sergeant went to the door and spoke into his radio. A moment later, a young soldier in fatigues appeared, sprinting through the rain from the bus stop. He reached Sarah, who was still standing there, stunned into immobility. Ma'am, the young soldier said, his voice filled with respect. The general wants to see you. You need to come with us, now. He gently took her arm. She looked down at the soggy cardboard box at her feet. The picture of her husband was face down in a puddle. My things, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Leave it, ma'am, the soldier said gently. We'll get you new things. No, she said, a flicker of her old stubbornness returning. The box comes with me. The soldier nodded, scooped up the wet box and escorted her back into the hospital lobby she had been thrown out of less than an hour before. As Sarah stepped back through the doors, a hush fell over the room. The entire hospital staff, the reporters, the federal agents, they all turned to look at her. She stood there, dripping wet in her rumpled scrubs, clutching a soggy cardboard box. She didn't look like a hero. She looked like what she was, a tired nurse at the end of a very long day. But this time, they saw her. They really saw her. Brenda O'Brien was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Brittany Moore was looking at Sarah with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. David Cole just stared, shaking his head in wonder. General Cartwright walked over to her. He gently took the cardboard box from the young soldier and looked inside. He saw the cracked mug, the dying plant, the framed photo. His expression softened. He looked at Sarah, and his eyes were filled with a deep, abiding respect. Welcome back, Colonel, he said softly. Then he turned to the shell-shocked Harold Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton, I believe Miss Miller is owed an apology, and a new contract. I would suggest a title like Director of Trauma Training and Patient Safety Protocols, with a significant pay raise, and final say on all hiring and firing in the emergency department. Am I clear? Yes, General, Pemberton squeaked, nodding vigorously. Crystal clear. Anything she wants. Sterling stood there, a broken man. His career was over. His reputation was in ruins. His father's name, once his shield, was now a liability. The reporters were snapping photos of his tear-streaked, devastated face. And then came the final, perfect moment of karmic justice. Big Mike,
The security guard stepped forward. He was holding an empty cardboard box. He walked past the reporters, past the federal agents, and stopped in front of Dr. Preston Sterling. He held out the box.
"I believe you know the way out, Doctor," Big Mike said, his voice low and steady, but carrying a universe of grim satisfaction. "Here's a box for your things. It's a bit small, but I'm sure you'll manage."
Sterling stared at the box as if it were a venomous snake. Then, with a choked sob, he took it. He was forced to walk to his office, followed by the relentless flash of cameras, to pack up his life, just as Sarah had done an hour earlier. Sarah watched him go, her expression unreadable. She felt no triumph, no joy in his destruction. Just a quiet, weary sense of justice being served. The general put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let's get you a cup of coffee, Dusty," he said. "A real one, not this hospital swill." She nodded, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself a small, tired smile. "I'd like that, Tom," she said. "I'd like that very much." 1 year later, the new sign over the entrance to the emergency department gleamed in the afternoon sun. The Colonel Sarah Dusty Miller Center for Trauma and Emergency Medicine. Inside, the atmosphere was transformed. The air of fear was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. Nurses spoke up in rounds, their opinions valued. Protocols had been rewritten, focusing on patient outcomes, not bureaucratic arse-covering. Mortality rates in the ED had dropped by 15%. A dedication ceremony was underway in the lobby. General Cartwright, retired now, sat in the front row, beaming proudly. Beside him sat Commander Cal Jensen, looking healthy and strong, a faint, pale scar on his neck the only reminder of that chaotic night. He wore it like a badge of honor. Sarah stood at the podium. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She wore a simple professional suit, her hair styled softly around her face. She looked not younger, but more herself. The tremor in her hands was still there, but no one saw it as a weakness anymore. They saw it for what it was, a testament to her strength. She looked out at the crowd, at Brenda, now her second in command, at a more mature, more compassionate Brittany, at David Cole, who was now a confident third-year resident who listened to his nurses. "They say power is about the title on your door," Sarah said, her voice, though still raspy, carrying through the quiet room. "But I learned a long time ago that real power is the ability to help. Real authority isn't granted by a hospital board. It's earned by the trust of your patient." She gestured to the new sign. "This center isn't named after me because I'm special. It's named after a nurse because it's a promise. It's a promise that here, the patient always, always comes first. It's a promise that if you have to break a rule to save a life, you do it. And I will have your back." A wave of applause filled the room. After the ceremony, a young, nervous-looking nurse approached her. "Colonel Miller, Ma'am, I'm new here. Can I ask you for some advice?" Sarah looked at the young woman, seeing a reflection of her own younger self in her earnest, slightly terrified eyes. "Don't call me Colonel," Sarah said with a warm smile. "Call me Sarah. And the best advice I can give you is this. Trust your gut. Listen to your patient. And never, ever let anyone make you feel small for caring too much." She paused, then added, "Just protect your patients. I'll take care of the rest." The young nurse's face flooded with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah." As the nurse walked away, her shoulders a little straighter, Sarah watched her go. The cycle of mentorship, of empowerment, was beginning anew. As for Preston Sterling, his medical license was permanently revoked. After a lengthy federal trial that exposed years of insurance fraud and malpractice cover-ups at St. Luke's under the old administration, he served 18 months in a minimum security federal facility. The last anyone heard, he was working at a cosmetic Botox clinic in a strip mall in Ohio. His once famous name now a cautionary tale told to first-year medical students. Sometimes, late at night, he'd swear he could still hear the thwop 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 of helicopter blades, and his own hands would begin to shake. Sarah never saw him again. She didn't need to. She had her own life to live, her own people to lead. She had finally found her peace, not by running from the fight, but by bringing the best parts of her warrior spirit home. And that is the incredible true story of Sarah Miller. It's crazy to think that she was fired for saving a life just minutes before a 4-star general needed her to do exactly that. It really makes you wonder how many heroes are out there right now, getting punished for doing the right thing just because it breaks a protocol. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more real-life dramas about heroes getting the justice they deserve, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below telling me what you think should have happened to Dr. Preston Sterling. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.